Everyone, thank you for joining us today. This is such a phenomenal opportunity for everyone to kind of get together, even though I know we're still stuck in this pandemic. At least we get to have these incredible workshops with incredible people that are just really such a blessing for us to have here today. So my name is Casey Boyd Swan. Ashley Nichols is, I guess, the co-developer of the Growing Democracy Project. And for those of you that aren't super familiar with this, the Growing Democracy Project's a collaborative effort housed at Kent State University. We started it in about 2019. And we put this together really to build some civic capacity by bringing together diverse constituencies, community members, civic leaders, grassroots organizations, and universities. And the goal was that by sharing our experiences and expertise and learning from one another, we could serve to empower communities and facilitate social change. So that's what we're about. We started off the project actually by hosting in-person workshops. Unfortunately, the pandemic came along and ruined our plans for that. We quickly actually shifted into a podcast, which you can find on SoundCloud, Apple, Google, a whole bunch of other places. And our podcast is 4 series. The first is Governing During Pandemic. The second is Power of Political and Civic Engagement. The third is Filling the Gap, and the fourth is Serving the Public Interest. So that's kind of an ongoing project that we're doing. And then at kind of the behest of some of the folks that support the Growing Democracy Project, we decided to take the leap into virtual workshops. So this is the second, actually only second one that we've done. The first one that we hosted back in October was the history and use of the op-ed for social action. And that was actually pretty well attended and a lot of fun. And today, of course, we're going to be covering grassroots democracy beyond the general election. And we have our third event in December, which is Organize Organizations with Phyllis Seven-Harris from the LGBTQ Community Center of Greater Cleveland. So hopefully some folks can join us for that. But today we are just really, really grateful to have with us Erika Brown and Tony Vento. Erika Brown is a community network builder with Neighborhood Connections, and Tony Vento is a consultant, facilitator, and trainer, reconnecting who we are to what we do in interpersonal and organizational life. And they are going to be our panelists, hosts for today. So welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello, all.
And we invite you, if you'd like, to unmute, as long as there's not a lot of background noise. And if there is, someone will alert you to that. So don't worry, we're in this together. More like a conversation when it's unmuted. And if you can be on screen, all those are your choice. We always respect your choice. Erika?
Okay, and so actually we're going to dive right in. And this is an opportunity really for you to see the beginning of what it looks like when you democratize spaces. And it's something super simple. It's probably something you've heard of before, but we're going to do that today. And so what we're starting off with, which is a fundamental practice of the work that we do in community network building, is we're starting with a check-in. And the reason why we do a check-in is that you open a gathering with a check-in and it allows room for everyone's voice to be put into whatever space you're in. So if you are in-person gatherings, one day, it's an opportunity to put your voice into the space and for everyone to put their voice into the space and to practice doing that and to do it at the very beginning. It's an opportunity in these virtual spaces when you've got these boxes everywhere for everyone to still feel like not just like a box, but like something that you had to say was important to the entire group and you got to put it into the space. And this is really an opportunity to create some generative energy for the work that we're going to do later. So there will be another opportunity to practice what it's like to democratize space. And this is also a way to share something about you. The work that we do really is about building relationships. And you build relationships by getting to know people, by building trust. And part of that is I need to know something about you so that I can begin to trust you, so that we can begin to build a relationship. And so with this check-in, we're going to do name, neighborhood, and community, or community, so whatever community you want to represent. And then you'll choose one question to briefly answer. And so you'll either say something that is new and good for you, and that could be on any level. Personal is great. Or you can answer the question, why is it important for you to be here? And how might it relate to your larger sense of purpose or calling? And that's also a really good personal question to ask, because it's like, my reason for being here might be totally different from yours. They might be completely aligned, and now we've like got something else in common, and we can move towards that building trust and building the relationship that goes into the work of building democracy with a small d.
All right. So Ashley, if you can set up some breakout rooms in pairs for those who are here. In a moment, we'll be doing that. And as you may have noticed, this is not a sit and get experience, okay? This is participative. It's grassroots democracy, right? So we'll be doing the means and the ends congruently. And while Ashley is setting that up, just give us a thumbs up. This is transparent facilitation. This is the opposite of the Wizard of Oz, where they tell you not to look behind the curtain, right? This is all transparency is also part of democratization. So when you're ready, give us the thumbs up. And in the meantime, just to orient you to the general flow, we'll be doing, well, we're already into it with this. We'll be having a little bit of time around the sort of principles, practices, the principles and theories behind the practices of community network building in this mode of critical andragogy and love made public, as we call social justice, as part of democratization. So this check-in, principles and practices, and then we'll have actually a good chunk of time to practice one of the main pieces of these processes that is a real inclusive, shared power experience. And then we'll come back into reflecting upon that together in the third part, considering what happened, so what does that have to do with grassroots democratization, and now what for each of us here before we check out with some resources and the opportunity to further connect. That's the overview.
I'm all set. I'll send
Okay.
y'all into room.
How much time, Erika, do you suggest?
3 minutes, since we're in pairs, and that gives everybody, each person, a chance to say what they need to say, to answer the question, and also for a little follow-up once each person checks in.
All right, and so when we come back, we'll just have a chance to share a little bit. And if there's something you hear others say that you'd like others back in the main room to hear, you can either ask them to do it or ask their permission to share it. Okay, enjoy. Let's enjoy getting to know each other better.
Hey everyone, welcome back.
I got to meet 2 of your students. They said wonderful things about you.
The checks are in the mail.
Well, welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. So I invite you to use the chat function. It's going to be super important throughout the rest. This is an advantage in Zoom compared to in person. We can actually have richer, multiple simultaneous forms of voices together. So I invite you to use the chat to summarize briefly in there, well, it says your name. Everybody's got their name up here. And name and again the location where you're at, like it's important to be embodiedly rooted in a democratizing space. Name, location, and maybe a brief response to your question that you chose, and we can have that in there as we're going along. Erika?
And so, like I said, so I'm going to actually model it so you see where it's in there. I'm just going to put, I'm Erika Brown from Mount Pleasant. I had a great check-in with Mackenzie. There you go. And then I'll leave it up to everyone else to follow suit. You can put your new and good or your reason for being here and how it's tied to your purpose.
And I'll bring up that next slide.
And so now we're going to move into really talking about community network building. And so this is a strategy that we use in the Neighbor Up Network. There we go. It's really about civic involvement and for the 21st century, which you see right there. There we go. Yay. And so what has come about is this idea that when you think about like all this disconnect that happens, and I'm sure that you've seen it, and that's a great reason to have something about grassroots democracy beyond the general election, beyond any elections, beyond any concepts of elected activism, beyond civic engagement only being about how you vote or when you vote or where you vote or for whom you vote. Because really there's a lot of other underlying things that have gone into how we end up where we are, where we really only see democracy as democracy with the big D when it comes to how we participate in the civic space. And so what we look at in community network building is this idea of we're disconnected, and where the challenges are for us as individuals and as communities. And when you think about it, you're going from the individual level to the community level to the systems level. If individuals are disconnected, you know that that other scaffolding is disconnected also. And we see the evidence of that. And so our lives are busier than ever before. Think about even your life this year where we think that we slowed down because we're at home. I'm just gonna put that out there. Like, this is an informal space. I'm gonna say ha to that. So our lives are busier than ever before. We've got technology, we've got social media, we've got everything coming at us. We've got a million sources of news-ish stuff, a lot of entertainment that poses as news, a lot of other things happening. There's a widened gap. I remember some people who are like 30 something now, but who were younger students during like the Occupy protest. When you think about it, when we're thinking about the 99% and the 1%, that gap has widened like consistently. And when you think about during this pandemic, how much more that gap has widened, when you think about how many more billions have gone to the billion end of the spectrum, and how fewer dollars are trickling down to the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder. Mobility, so we can go pretty much wherever we want to go, whether it's virtually or physically, but can everybody? Diversity, we're used to being with who we're used to being with. We're comfortable, we like our comfort zones. And so when we've got this like globalization and all this diversity happening, that increases our fear, that decreases trust, because it's harder to get to know people. At least it is sometimes in our heads. Like, I think about all the people that I know on social media that I've never met in person. And I think about all the people that I actually know and have met in person that I probably don't know as much about as I do about people I know on social media. And so we really have to think about like, how are these things playing together and pulling us apart? We still have like huge amounts of segregation. I live in Cleveland in a very segregated space. I live in a neighborhood where everybody, like 99% of people who live here look like me. And you got to probably drive a mile before you see anything different. But we also have an opportunity to do something about that. And so that's why this says that community network building is civic involvement for the 21st century. We can go to the next one.
What did that do? There we go.
And so here's the solution that we think is a really good one for all this isolation, this fear, this mistrust and distrust, the misinformation and disinformation, and this, we're going to put the word out there, it is 2020 word, polarization. Like, so here's something that can help with that. Community network building. I'm going to go straight from the slide. I know everybody here can read, but this is an emerging social science that makes it easy for people to step into the civic life of their community. And as there is no new thing under the sun, this idea, it's really about putting it down so that people can see it and putting practices in place so that people can do them and use them and know how we can connect to each other and reconnect to each other. I love the one bullet point that says this is not your grandma's block club. So a lot of time when we think about these small spaces and we think about how we gather in neighborhoods and community, we go to like the block club, we think about that. But really, having been a part of my own streets block club at one point, note that I said having been because I am no longer, when we think about these spaces, they're still really hierarchical. Yeah. Like it's still a lot like how we sometimes see democracy with a big D, where there are only some people who are allowed to be in charge, and maybe we pick them and maybe we don't. And maybe they do what we want them to do and maybe they kind of don't. But really, this is not about that. This is not about just having another small space to create the same types of structures that we already have in the larger public spaces. So one of the fundamental parts of this is that we have facilitated gatherings. So, and we use very specific practices in order to create aspirational, interactive space. It is high energy space and it is focused on action. And it is the idea that everyone who shows up in that space is exactly who should be there. And it's about this idea that everyone who shows up in that space is a gift, period. Like you showed up, inherently what you have to say matters. Inherently how you can contribute matters, and you can contribute. And when we look at these spaces, when we think about how intentional they are, when we think about the practices that we use in these spaces, the aspirational part isn't like this pie in the sky idea. It really comes from like all organizing. You know, if you're familiar with any type of organizing, traditional community organizing, if you're using community network building, if you're using any of these strategies, it's really thinking about, we're starting with the world the way it is. And we are all always trying to get to the world as we want it and as we'd love to see it. And so that's really where the aspiration comes in, is not this whole idea of, I want this perfect place, but it's like, this is kind of not what we want. And how do we get to what we want? What do we aspire to? How do we bring our best selves? How do we bring who we really are? How do we bring the gifts, skills, knowledge, and talents that we already have? How do we bring that and put that together with other people? How do I realize my individual power and my individual contribution? And how do I put that together with other people who are realizing that? And how do we build that out collectively so that we can take it from the individual level to the community transformation level and eventually to systems change level? Okay. And so that's listed on there, and I'll let you have that slide. And this will be part of the resources later. Tony.
All right, so as we, as just a summary then of really community network building, really, which is, I think of as a North American emergent version of what I encountered so much in my human rights work and graduate studies in liberation of social ethics in Latin America, right? That this is critical andragogy brought present. Paulo Freire's work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? Creating spaces where really they're rooted in taking seriously our experience, especially with and for those who have been socialized and internalized into thinking otherwise, right? And that when we do this in a way that we recognize that, of course, institutions are hugely important in the shaping of culture and the functioning of society and systems. But what often gets lost, I think especially in Northeast Ohio, is a very institutionalist-oriented culture. Actual residents, people, who we are as persons and how we relate to each other, and that basis of civic space is really at the core and is not predicated on institutional spaces. So this intersection between, we represent, this says, yeah, this is the intersection. So that relationship building is at the core of this approach, not just systems and structure building. And inviting people to show up as persons. Notice that's what we did in the check-in. We didn't give curriculum vitae. We didn't ask you for your role. We asked you some questions related to, I use this term loosely, your soul, your way of being, right? Where are you? Why is it important for you to be here? We didn't ask you to give name, rank, and serial number. There's some things that precede that and that get lost often in our institutionalized culture. And yet the bases for power and for being able to not only not wait for institutions to do things, but of course, when the time is right, to exercise the power in every appropriate way, to call institutions to do what they were instituted to do. And so there's this overlapping that happens within that. So it's all about trust to be able to create that. Moving on. So this would, I'm just going to quickly summarize with some graphics, an intuitive introduction to some more of these principles and practices. So a typical community environment, right, as Erika identified, right, is structured by many of these habits: internalized habits, interpersonal habits, organizational habits, systemic habits, right, that are rooted in fear, isolation, and division. And they're clever manipulation, right, that enable certain modes of power to continue and to actually accelerate, and certain modes of disempowerment to continue and to accelerate, right? Instead, what we create at the grassroots level is a deep civic re-engagement, a deep civic re-education rooted in the belief in everyone being a gift. And everyone is a gift, everyone has a gift. It's outside of neoliberal market theory, right, of recognizing that we are all shaped by that, but that we are persons first. So one quick way to say this is like neighboring for the 21st century, and inviting people into spaces that actually that are alluring, that are fun, that are enjoyable, rather, more so than fun. Enjoyable in the sense that, like, oh, there's a deep fundamental joy that comes from connecting again and being welcomed for who I am, and being invited to welcome you for who you are, as you are, where you are, taking seriously your gifts. And your gifts include not just the things you can quote unquote give or offer to other people, but that our needs are actually gifts to offer as well. It's part of what binds and connects us in community and into relationships. So when that happens, lots of things can emerge. And the Neighbor Up network, you can see on our website and all these sorts of things. Incredible stories, what I call of adhocracy that emerges in lots of short-term ways on this, that people experiment. It's a culture of vulnerable, safe enough experimentation, of people claiming their shared power, right? Recognizing that we're in a culture that's shaped by deep divisions, as Erika said, right? And yet we can be interdependent in a way that heals and transforms even things like racism, right? And all the other isms. So there's this adhocracy that emerges. People get to experiment with all sorts of things based on their hopes and aspirations, and testing what it's like to put those out with other people, asking questions, getting connected to others, right? Getting good information, creating mutual support, and through that, practicing moving into collective action, even in small way, especially starting in small ways. And these agglomerate up. And they agglomerate up, as we've seen here, in 4 rough categories. Health building, wealth building, placemaking, and racial truth, healing, and transformation. And there are plenty of fantastic examples about that, but we'll perhaps save those for Q&A. So how do we do this? So there are spaces that are created by these practices, and the practices help create the spaces. These are rooted in the values that you heard Eric and I already identifying, right? So these values come into practices. The practices create habits. The habits help create the spaces that then feed, as we say, when you come into these spaces, it's caught more than taught in cognitive direct terms. It's caught through the experience and the doing, and then reflected upon and tested, and then brought back into the cycle. Without a lot of the jargon that I'm using right now. And so just to map this out briefly, you can see in the center there are still those spaces on the left-hand side. Moving out on the left-hand side are samples of some of the names of some of the kinds of spaces that we've been experimenting with, intentionally creating, and there are many more. And on the right side, you can see the practices that some of whom are identified there. We will be invited into practicing one of those practices again. We did the check-in earlier in a brief way. We may have a check-out as well, but we'll be doing business of the network actually. If that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. So just to briefly show some of the overview. So building these networks and rebuilding civic infrastructure that's been strip mined, frankly, in our culture, is one way that I think of it. You know, and so many political campaigns with a small p and a large p, you know, I think have strip mined much of civic life without creating the kind of environment that really is a healthier ecology. Instead, what this does, as you can see in the nesting, so right, builds out this sense of shared power, right? It sparks social innovation and sparks system reform. We can go into some other examples in a moment here. So step one, and really, I'm not good at graphics. So really, if I was better at this, you would see like an upward cycle, actually, of these repeated steps in all sorts of interactive ways. I'm not good at like double helixes and things, okay. But so we coming together in this way actually does generate value. And I don't mean this in neoliberal terms. I mean it in commonwealth terms, right? That we are each other's wealth with each other. We are each other's safety. We are each other's neighbors. We are each other's fellow brothers and sisters. Right? And connecting in this way, we actually strengthen each other. And together then, in those spaces, as I said, what emerges is, entrepreneurial is this placeholder term, but self-directed action. People create all sorts of action together and experiment together. And then sometimes that even emerges, and all of this is in a deep process of listening to ourselves and to each other. Listening for what's emerging, and then coming into kinds of larger campaigns with a large C and a small c. You know, it might involve, as it did, changing the city of Cleveland laws that allowed for placemaking to repaint streets and sidewalks and take over and redo alleys in ways that are citizen owned and resident transformed, let alone other pieces, right, around infant mortality that are going on, right? And some things around digital equity that are being experimented with right now, right? That have these implications that have been drawn out, right? From listening, for example, right now, so much right now, it was true before COVID, right? The realities of the digital divide have been driving some layers on this, for example, experimentation. This is going to be in your slide deck. It goes much more in depth to each of those three levels. I'm just going to let you know that it's there. So that's a bit of principles and practices of community network building, rooted in this kind of liberationist critical andragogy, I think adapted into a North American setting. And there will be links at the end to articles and websites that are more systemic about this, but we wanted to give you a feel. And see, we try to do no more than 10 to 15 minutes of input before we move back into some practicing. Erika?
All right, so we'll move back into the practicing because we'll have time for Q&A and we can do even more input then. All right, so the thing that we're going to practice, the practice that you're going to be involved in today, and that we're asking you to and inviting you to participate in, is called Business of the Network. And so you'll hear some of the terms, some of the things that we say, some of the titles of practices really do like take you back to like, wait, something similar sounds like that about other types of meetings that I've been to. Well, absolutely it does. So you'll hear sometimes, like if you go to a community meeting, or especially for like political candidates or like in local politics, and you see the agenda for the meeting and they're standing at the podium and you're at those tables, and it'll be like, we have old business and we have new business. But it's still their business. It's not really your business. Like, you didn't get to choose what they were going to talk about that day. So this is really a practice that's about the business of the network. So the network is really all of these individual people who have decided that it is absolutely worth the risk. It is absolutely worth it to connect with other individual people who are trying to figure out, like, how do I show up? What are my gifts? What are yours? How do we put those together? How do I figure out how powerful I am? How are you figuring that out? How do we put that together and realize that? And so, like, even when you heard new and good as part of the check-in, think about a lot of times what comes up at community meetings is the old and bad stuff. And then we're going to talk about that forever, not really talk about how to do anything.
And my double helix would go the other way.
Exactly. We're gonna learn the graphics in 2021. All right. So with Business of the Network, this is an opportunity where it is not an agenda that's already set for you. This is walking into a conversation that the people who show up create based on what's important to them. So it's really based on asking a question about something that's important to you, but there's a catch. Aha, there's more. And it's not a bad catch at all. What the catch is that instead of showing up already knowing what the answer is in your head to the question, you show up knowing that other people are going to show up who have other wisdom, who have other knowledge, who have other skills and talents and gifts, and that they are going to contribute to a conversation about whatever your question is. And it's an opportunity to exchange some learning, to open your eyes to a new perspective. It is not ever a presentation. It is not ever a soapbox moment. It's not a lecture moment. It is really a conversation. And when we do these in person, people are literally sitting in a circle and leaning into each other, because it's really this idea of every single voice that shows up for that conversation has something to contribute to it, and everyone has the opportunity to do that. And the person who is the original host is really the person who comes up with the question. This is an opportunity to practice allowing a question to host the conversation. And that can be kind of uncomfortable, because traditionally what we do is, like, questions are posed, but somebody else tells us, how to participate in the conversation, and they lead us through it. And yes, there are some guidelines, but really, once you get into the conversation, it's all about this exchange that's happening between the participants in that conversation. And so here's a good graphic for that. And this is all about a way to have focused 20-minute conversations on topics that are relevant and current to the network group. And that's it. You're going to have a conversation.
So we're gonna do that here. This is not a sit and get. This is a make together. So there were questions that were sent in as part of your registration. I'll show them in a moment. And what I'd suggest is, just for the sake of time, that we choose one of those questions that was sent in, and then actually practice a moment of surfacing another question that has walked in with you. Perhaps it was sent in advance, but maybe we always make room for that which shows up, because that's the real that we're working from. So be thinking to yourself, is there a question that you would love to pose to others here for their wisdom, their resources, their network, their connections, their gifts to respond to explore together, to wonder out loud about, and see what is the life that wants to emerge with that question, with this unique group of people who are here. And we'll have two, so we'll generate two, and you'll have a choice, because that's a key core principle of everything we do here, is invitational and choice, right? So that the energy comes from that rather than the mandated of having to sit through a predetermined sequence of things. Okay, so if I can do this correctly, you will see the choices that were sent, the questions that were sent in advance. Now, I hope what this shows, I'm just gonna, so in black is what was sent in, and I took a step at framing them into questions, because we put these into question format and let the question run things. So in red, I put these out. And so I'm just gonna.
Tony, can you make them, can you increase the size?
I can try. Thank you. Oops.
Yes.
Yes, apparently I can.
Good job.
And let's try that. Did that work? Okay, so just briefly. So let's just go, for the sake of time, intuitively, whoever's here that may have posed this question, let's just, for the sake of this time right here, whichever is the first intuitive question that somebody really wants to host. The key is, if you ask this question, if it's got power and energy for you, that would be a gateway into the choice, not one that was just like, sort of, in my head question. No, like, is this in your gut somewhere as well as your head? So do police need to unlearn shoot to kill? Was one question. How can we, the people, work at creating democracy outside of elections without needing permission from non-responsive elected officials? How can I get involved here in Ohio? What might be enough to know so that when I use the phrase democratic grassroots movements, I don't feel like referring to a vague, general, modern thing that is occurring? What changes in county, state, police, sheriff training and policy and independent review of police actions is needed to prevent killings of Blacks and mentally ill? What is commoning? Where is it done, and how is it related to public banking, public funding for health, for example? Oh, I guess I didn't rework that next one, but anyway, and the last one, how might we build a better sense of agency with civic engagement? Who here, is there anyone here who has one of these questions? Who has a question? Yes, Gwen, please unmute yourself. Which one was it?
It was creating democracy without asking permission.
Okay. How about we go with that as one of the choices here? Let me find it.
There's another one that seemed to me similar. I'm trying to.
And this often happens, sort of friendly amendment wise. Oh, here it is. How can we, the people, work at creating democracy outside of elections without needing permission? Okay.
But there is another one that was similar.
Anyone here who had a similar question to bring in as a friendly amendment with this one? We're just going to take another minute or two to do this piece and then generate the other question. Anyone else here?
I think the last question about civic engagement seems like it's a similar kind of flavor.
Is the person who asked that question here? Going once, going twice. I can't see all the. Can someone else who sees all the?
Tony, it might have been my question. I don't remember.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I've worked on so many things since I filled out.
Exactly. All right. So would you, if so, JP, do you see that as a friendly amendment to
Sure.
join
Yeah,
together
it
with?
seems
Okay,
related.
great. So perhaps JP and Gwen currently are nominated to host this question. Now we've got that question. Now we're going to generate the second question. And actually, JP and or Gwen might change their mind at that point and be like, oh, both of us want to be in that other choice. But let's just take a moment right now. Who has a question, a challenge that they'd like to put out? And Eric and I can help you shape it into a question if need be. But what's something that you are wondering about that you'd like to wonder out loud about with others, especially hear others wonder about? The host does very little talking in these breakouts, except to show where in their gut or life or work this is an important question for them. Who has a question?
Actually, if I can jump in again, the one about commenting, personally, I think commenting is one of those ways one might create democracy without
Okay.
asking permission.
Gwen, do you want to change to that question? And if that's the case, JP, you could host the first question. But there's room here to generate a question that wasn't sent in advance. Let's give a little space for that to emerge first, if that's the case. For those who did not get a chance to send in a question in advance, or regardless of having sent a question in advance, what's a live question for you right now? We'll just take another 30 seconds to let that begin to surface. And silence actually is a great partner in these gatherings, in person as well as online. Did somebody put it in the chat? I see. And so JP cannot be a solo host in the group, but good to know because of his schedule today.
I have I guess it's a kind of a amalgamation of a question that kind of combines a lot of the things that are here, but how do we use, or can we use, grassroots democracy to get folks in our community to understand why or how problems affect others, even though they may not affect them?
So how can we use grassroots democracy in ways that
Maybe to get to, I don't know, to kind of not teach a sense of empathy, but get people to engage their empathy.
all right, in a way that engages empathy for each other, in ways that engage empathy for each other?
Yeah, I like that.
Does
I
that
like that.
say your question in a way that is in your gut?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. I like that.
How do we use grassroots democracy in ways that grows empathy for each other, with each other?
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Empathy for and with each other. All right, that is the second question. So Gwen, would you like to host the first question? Still that one about not needing permission?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Sure.
Great. Okay, so now in your chat box, I asked you to enter number 1 if you'd like to be in the breakout with Gwen, where the question is, how can we the people work at creating democracy outside of elections without needing permission from non-responsive elected officials? And question number 2, enter 2 in the chat box now, so that Ashley knows what to do with these breakouts. Number 2 is, how can we use grassroots democracy in ways that in ways that grows empathy with and for each other, in ways that grows empathy for and with each other? So please make your choices now. And while Ashley sets that up, Erika, what do you think would be a good, I have an idea. I'm going to share our little poem that was created. Unless, Erika, you have another
Oh,
idea?
actually, that's a good one. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, if I can figure out how to switch screens here. So this is a poem that was created in a network gathering like this online that's been happening weekly, what we call a community of practice for anybody who cares about building community. And it's people from very grassroots level all the way through institutional folks coming together. And we have a time, what we learned in these gatherings is that the hangout time afterwards is just as important as the formal time together. Just like in person, so much happens when we're actually together. And somebody just started with this one line that said, after her first time being in this kind of space, very tentative at first, very conscious of what she wasn't. Eventually, by the end of the gathering and then in the hangout time said, oh, I get it. I may know more than I think I know. And someone else said, I think that could be the beginning of a line to reflect on or journal about after today. And then someone else said, or it could be a poem. We just started right here and anybody could add the next line. And we took 3 minutes, each wrote a sentence, and this is what came out. So Ashley, while you're creating the breakouts, who would like to read this poem out loud in your own voice? Just trust your intuition and exercise your voice. Hang out. Who'd like to read it out loud for the rest of us?
I'll read it.
Okay.
If we don't have a volunteer,
Or-
I'll do it.
I'll volunteer. Maybe, oh, we can
Yay.
each take a line.
Ooh, I like that.
We can do that.
Start.
Right. Okay.
So you and Erika will each take
All right.
the line.
Okay.
All right.
I may know more than I think I know.
Because we all have something to offer each other.
Because with my group, we can create,
We can learn from all parts of ourselves.
even when we think we have nothing to offer.
Especially when we think we have nothing to offer.
We may know more than we think we know.
So as you notice, we mix in all sorts of modalities in these spaces, right? All sorts of art and all sorts of things, right? So how's it going, Ashley? Need a little more time?
I think I'm good. Real quick question, Tony, are you going
Yes.
to find one?
Yeah, yes. So actually, Erika and I will divvy up. I forgot to choose which one. So whichever one Erika didn't choose,
I chose one.
then I'm in number 2. And we'll have just really, Erika, how much time do you think for these?
15-ish.
Okay,
15-ish.
15.
All right.
And that means there'll be a little button that pops up and yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I have it set up for 15 minutes. You'll get the 60-second countdown. So I think I have it correct.
Wonderful.
You're also
Wonderful.
free to come back to the main room if I made an error and we can adjust it. So, all
Great.
right.
Thank
See
you
you
so
soon.
much.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. So please reopen your chat. Oh, and I forgot to save my chat in the breakout moment, which I always forget with this technology disappears. Anyway, so that's why we had each other there. Invite you to reopen the chat, and that's where you can enter your aha or your where did lightning strike for you, or what's a step of action that you may want to consider taking because of having been in this unique moment together. And what's that life that's inviting you to live with it because of having been in this conversation. So please add that into the chat while we have just 30 seconds from each breakout group of sharing that. I know breakout 2 is ready. Jake, would you like to go? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I was able to take from our discussion is just what you said right there at the end when you were talking about Martin Luther King and the fact that nobody really likes conflict, and conflict is always something that we collectively try to avoid, and that social movements as a whole aren't, even though they're portrayed in the media sometimes in a negative way as a means to separate and divide people, they're really at their core really based upon togetherness and inclusion.
Thanks. Thank you. And others can add more into the chat. Thanks, Jake, for stretching in this way together. Who from group 1 can share 30 seconds of an aha or where did lightning strike or an action that might want to grow?
So Gwen posed the question. Oh, there we go. And it's right there in the chat because Gwen has to leave. Is there anyone else from group 1 who wanted to add anything?
I see. Thinking about intergenerational bridges in community building. Thank you, Gwen. All right. Well, great. And so that was an experience of what we call a business of the network, a breakout generated within a framework, but not a predetermined agenda by those who are inviting the space into being and stewarding that space. Right? It's a different experience of power. So this is now part 3 of our teach-in. Part 1 was, actually having a little bit of the experience of the check-in leading us into the principles, some of a little touch of the principles and theories and practices. So step 2 was experiencing one of the practices. And now step 3 is a little chance to ask ourselves, gosh, what did we learn from that? Let's see if I can actually pull up this. I know we have this beautiful slide somewhere, but so there are other practices, so like marketplace. Okay, but here, what happened? We'll just take a moment, given our time remaining, just a moment to map this, what happened to the theories, principles, and practices, right, of what just happened. And we'll just take really, sorry for the time on this, but just like 2-3 minutes for that. So we're just going to focus on what happened and how it relates to community network building before we ask, like, what does this have to do with grassroots democratization? So mapping back onto what you may have noticed about these principles and practices, what happened? All right. We'll give you 15 seconds in silence to begin to surface. It could be a question about what happened, or it could be an observation about what happened and how it was related to what you heard before we did business of the network. 15 seconds begins now. Thanks. So I ask you to trust that, and you've got something. Instead of pretending you're listening, now you've got something. You can put it in the chat and ask others to speak out loud for just a minute or two. What happened, and how does it map to what you'd heard already about community network building? in this spirit. And I'll take this off screen. What did we do? And what did it have to do with what we said we were teaching about earlier? There was a co-creation of how might we ideas, says Casey. Right, shared power, even on determining what we were talking about together. Casey, you're on mute.
Yeah, we were building off of one another. Someone would say something that would spark something in someone else, and they would say something based on that spark. Yeah, so it's really like a co-creation of like a fire of ideas, right?
Right, and the question was in charge, and behind that, the passion for that question was in charge, not Casey, and not even me, I hope. All right, what else? What happened, and how does it relate to what you've had a little taste of what we said community network building was about?
I think what might be important to remember and realize is that the grassroots is meant to be something that connects people rather than just focused on change, because people can exhaust themselves trying to create change.
Beautiful. Can someone get that into the chat? Yeah, connecting, building relationship is at the heart of grassroots democratization, right? It's the relationship that creates the capacity to hold the tension when we're dealing with the conflict for change. It's the persons who have to hold this. Otherwise, we see what's happening in our larger culture. Great. That's a start. Others can continue to add this into the chat, and just given our time, to respected time, I'm just going to go back to then the next step. And by the way, Eric and I are happy to hang out, as we've discovered is so important, after the 1:30 close, for continue to hold the space open for your percolating and musing and exercising your voice and wondering out loud about what has been emerging for you with this. But in the meantime, so now what did what we just do have to do with grassroots democratization? I think we were already sort of tending there, right? So there's a sort of a flow, right? What happened? So what is important about that? What was important about what we did and how it relates to grassroots democratization? So what? So what does this matter?
I think that there was an opportunity for like everyone to share and like to show what was important to them. And although there were like group leaders or like people leading the question, it wasn't really somebody dictating the conversation. And I think that's an important part of grassroots democracy, is letting everyone in the organization dictate where the conversation goes.
Thank you, Madeline. Who else? So what was important about this that might relate to grassroots democratization? We can just wonder out loud about that.
So I'm honestly just going to pop in here real quick, just because of the conversation I was in during Business of the Network. What I heard was really like this idea of you could see the spark starting of this idea, like with information exchange very briefly, was really this idea that there could be a new network coming out of the beginning of that conversation. Like it was the beginning of a conversation, but there could be something new coming out of that, because clearly connections were made even in just 15 minutes.
Thank you. And typically we do like 25 to 27 minutes of these, right? So you can imagine the kind of momentum that builds, right? And just so you know, this typically leads right into the next practice of what we call marketplace or commonwealth, where people quickly and in a fun way get to surface what we don't usually hear from each other. What do you want to offer to anybody who's present? It might be related to what the conversation just was, or just anything in your life. Like, hey, I've got an extra bookcase, who wants it? Or, right, or like, oh, I've got some books about what that conversation was about. Right? What do you want to offer? What do you request? What do you need? As I said in the beginning, it's not just what we can give in the typical sense that builds relationship and democracy. It's what we need that opens up, if we're vulnerable enough to say it, that invites connection and builds community and finding solutions. Right? So we do what can you offer? What do you need? And what do you want to declare for having been here? Right? Because saying it, right, voicing it is one of the most fundamental acts of democratization and building power and bringing into reality the future that we want. Okay, so last, who else has something else to say about what else? So what was important about what we did and how it might relate to grassroots democratization?
I'll add, so I didn't someone has to be the tech person that waits in the lobby.
Thank you.
I didn't participate, but I have participated in many community of practice meetings. And so it's really fun to have this in the space. But I would say one of the things that I appreciate as a faculty member who it challenges me to think about how I teach and create space, and continually these practices push me to think differently about what educational spaces can look like and be like, and continually moving in those directions. So like, there's a couple people here who are my students, but you know, constantly borrowing from these philosophies and practices to help to do that. So
beautiful. Thank you. Right. Yeah. Well, wonderful. How about just in the interest of time, we'll go into this next piece. And I invite you to continue to add into the chat or to make note of some things that are percolating for you that you might want to add in the Hangout or with others you know here. And you can connect with others here, right? The chat is enabled in a way that you can make a private chat and say like, hey, how about we do a virtual coffee? Or hey, that thing you said, I want to hear more about that. Or here's what I want to add to that, right? So you can start to make those connections now. Where here we are. And so this is, I guess we've got about 3 minutes for any other Q&A that you've got now or dialogue. Sorry, I didn't manage this better in a way that, of course, it's most important to have more time for this kind of Q&A in addition to what will happen in the breakout. So what questions, what responses, where does this fit or not fit? And I'm not afraid of hearing like dissent in growing democracy. Okay. So, what fit, what didn't fit, what challenged, what resonated, what just like had a bad taste, or what grew for you. Questions, dialogue, something you want to ask each other, and not just Erika or myself.
can I also add that this is a I'm actually going to momentarily, I'm going to stop recording now because I think this is a safer space for people to be able to express
Thank you.
How they feel about that. And to acknowledge that this has nothing like, so if I know you in other spaces, I advise you or whatever, that that's my caveat. There's no judgment here either. So
you're here as a person, not in that role.
Yes.
Is that would be one way to say it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for